Evan Rourke often said the strangest part of his marriage wasn't the silence, it was how normal the silence had begun to feel. It spread through the apartment like a thin layer of frost, delicate, quiet, and always there, even when nothing looked wrong on the surface. He used to tell himself that long marriages went through seasons. But lately, it felt as though his husband, Miles, had stepped out of theirs entirely and left Evan wandering alone in a house full of ghost memories. That was the unspoken truth hovering behind the moment when Evan called his driver back upstairs. The moment that would reshape everything. The moment he still replayed in his mind with an odd mixture of caution and inevitability. But the explanation, the reason behind that call, lived several days earlier. It began on a grey Wednesday, one of those afternoons when the sky felt heavy without actually raining. Evan sat in the back seat of his own car, scrolling through a series of messages from Miles that were too polite, too rehearsed. Running late again. Don't wait up. The same sentence, copied from 100 nights before. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Miles wouldn't read it until hours later anyway. In the driver's seat, Caleb Mercer adjusted the rearview mirror just slightly, enough for Evan to notice that the other man's eyes flickered upward in concern. Caleb was not the intrusive type. He had worked for Evan and Miles for 10 months, and never once overstepped, never once pried. That restraint made his subtle attention feel oddly comforting. You want to take the long way home, sir? Caleb asked. His voice carried a steady warmth, the kind that broke through the day's gray. Evan shook his head. Just home, please. Caleb nodded and turned his eyes back to the road, but something in that brief exchange stayed with Evan. Caleb had asked not out of formality, but out of genuine consideration, something Evan realized he hadn't felt from Miles in weeks. The drive was quiet but not cold. The car hummed through familiar routes, passing streetlights that blinked awake one by one. Evan watched the reflections shimmer across the tinted windows. For a moment, he imagined a life where someone actually came home on time. Someone who didn't treat shared dinners like unwanted obligations. Someone who remembered the life they had promised to build together. By the time Caleb pulled into the garage, Evan's chest ached with a dull heaviness. He stepped out slowly, gripping his briefcase as though he needed it to balance. Have a good evening, sir, Caleb said, stepping around to close the trunk. Evan hesitated. He almost said stay a moment, though he had no reason to. Instead, he forced a small smile and went upstairs to the quiet that waited for him. The next several days settled into the same pattern, Miles leaving early, returning late, disappearing behind closed doors with explanations that felt too thin to hold. Even the apartment seemed tired of pretending. Dishes stacked. Unopened mail gathered on the sideboard. Evan found himself lingering in the elevator after work, reluctant to walk inside and face the stagnant air of what his marriage had become. Oddly, the only steady presence in his day was Caleb. Their conversations remained simple, but meaningful in their simplicity. Caleb spoke little about himself, but he always noticed what others missed. You haven't been sleeping well, he remarked one morning as they headed to Evan's office. Evan blinked in surprise. Is it that obvious? Only if someone's looking, Caleb replied. The word stayed with him longer than they should have. On Friday evening, Evan prepared dinner, nothing elaborate, just grilled vegetables and pasta. Miles had promised, explicitly this time, that he would be home by 8. Evan lit a small candle on the table. He even opened the balcony doors to let in the breeze. He tried. He truly tried. At 8:17, he received the message, something came up. Don't wait up. Again. Sorry. It wasn't anger that washed through Evan, it was exhaustion, a quiet kind that settled in the bones. He blew out the candle, packed the food away, and sat alone at the dining table long after the breeze turned chilly. When he left for work the next morning, Caleb was already waiting by the car. He opened the door as he always did, but paused when he saw Evan's expression. Rough night? He asked, his voice low, careful. Evan didn't trust his own voice enough to answer. He simply slid into the seat and exhaled slowly, as though releasing something that had been trapped inside him. Caleb didn't push. He drove in attentive silence, hands steady on the wheel. Evan found himself focusing on the details, the way Caleb's shoulders relaxed when turning corners, the calm way he navigated morning traffic, the quiet strength in his posture. Strength that felt grounding when Evan felt anything but. Later that day, as they pulled back into the building, the weight of the week finally caught up with Evan. He stepped out of the car, closed the door behind him, and turned toward the elevator, but he didn't press the button. Instead, he looked back. Caleb was checking the trunk, making sure nothing had shifted. He moved with the kind of quiet presence that made Evan uneasy, not because it was invasive, but because it was the first comfort he had noticed in days. "Caleb," Evan called before he could talk himself out of it. Caleb straightened. "Yes, sir." Evan swallowed. He didn't fully understand what he wanted, only that he needed not to be alone in that moment. The apartment upstairs felt suffocatingly empty, and the silence waiting behind its doors felt heavier than anything he carried now. "Could you come upstairs for a minute?" Evan asked, voice steadier than he felt. "There's something I need help with." Caleb hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Not out of discomfort, but out of respect, making sure the request was intentional. When he nodded, it was gentle, deliberate, of course. They walked to the elevator together. Evan felt the shift immediately, the awareness of Caleb beside him, the unspoken question hanging in the air. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and as they stepped inside, Evan felt a strange pulse of anticipation he couldn't yet explain. When the doors closed, sealing them in that quiet space, he wondered if this was the moment everything had begun to change, or if the change had started long before, unnoticed, in the small acts of kindness he had only now allowed himself to see. Either way, he knew this. Calling Caleb upstairs was not an accident. It was a turning point, even if he didn't yet know where it would lead, and when the elevator reached his floor, he realized he was finally ready to find out. Evan's apartment felt different with Caleb in it, warmer somehow, though neither of them spoke as they stepped inside. The faint hum of the air conditioner, the soft sound of the door clicking shut, the careful pause that followed, everything carried a weight Evan wasn't used to acknowledging. He set his keys on the counter, aware of Caleb standing a few steps behind him, respectfully waiting for direction, as if entering his employer's home required a different kind of permission. "Thank you for coming up," Evan said quietly, turning toward him. Caleb nodded. "Of course. What did you need help with?" Evan hesitated, not because he wanted to lie, but because he wasn't entirely sure how to name what he was feeling. Loneliness? Confusion? Fear that he was dissolving into a life he hadn't meant to settle for. He gestured toward the living room instead. "Just something I wanted to check," he said. "With the balcony door." Caleb followed him without question, examining the sliding frame with the same meticulous care he showed in everything he did. His fingers traced the metal track, checking for friction, testing the latch. Evan watched him, studying the way Caleb focused, present, precise, patient. Miles used to be like that in the early years, back when attention was something freely given, not rationed. "It's sticking a little," Caleb said after a moment. "Would you like me to oil the track?" "Yes," Evan replied, though he barely registered the words. He was more aware of how grounded Caleb seemed in the space, how naturally he filled the silence without overwhelming it. When Caleb went to fetch the small maintenance kit he kept in the car, Evan leaned on the kitchen counter and tried to steady his breathing. Inviting Caleb upstairs had been impulsive, but the need beneath it wasn't. He simply wanted not to feel invisible for one evening. Caleb returned quietly, kneeled by the door, and began working. Evan watched the precise movements, the controlled way Caleb applied the lubricant, the gentle patience in the task. There was something intimate in the simplicity of it, someone taking care of a problem he couldn't fix himself. After a few minutes, Caleb tested the door. It slid smoothly now, gliding with a soft whisper. "There," he said, standing. "Good as new." Evan offered a small smile. "Thank you." Caleb didn't leave. Not immediately. He waited, hands clasped in front of him, as if sensing that the door hadn't been the real reason Evan had asked him upstairs. "You okay?" Caleb asked quietly. Evan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I keep telling myself it's just stress, but the truth is, I'm tired of coming home to nothing." Caleb's expression softened. He didn't step closer, didn't offer empty comfort. He simply listened, giving Evan the space he had forgotten he needed. Has it been like this for a while? Caleb asked. Evan nodded. Months now. Maybe longer. Miles and I, we barely talk, unless it's about schedules or work. I don't even remember the last time we sat on the couch together. Caleb looked toward the sofa, as if imagining the life Evan was describing, a life that had slipped into silence. Sometimes people drift without realizing it, Caleb said. And sometimes they notice, but don't know how to say it. Evan swallowed, knowing the words held more truth than he wanted to admit. Have you two talked about it? Caleb asked. I've tried, Evan whispered. But it feels like he's somewhere else. Like I'm a placeholder he's outgrown. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He seemed to consider his words carefully, choosing them with the same deliberation he brought to every action. You deserve to be seen, he said softly. The sentence landed heavier than Evan expected. He looked at Caleb, genuinely looked at him, and found no judgment, only quiet sincerity. Caleb, Evan said, voice softer now, why do you notice things no one else does? Caleb met his eyes calmly. Because I pay attention. It was such a simple answer, yet it struck something in Evan that had been dormant. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, and Caleb remained standing for a moment before asking softly, may I sit? Evan nodded. Caleb sat at a respectful distance, close enough to show presence, far enough to keep boundaries clear. For a few seconds, they said nothing. The room felt balanced, grounded, as though Evan had invited not just a person upstairs, but a small piece of stability he'd been missing. I don't want to make assumptions, Caleb began carefully, but I've noticed you look weighed down lately. I didn't want to pry. You're not prying, Evan said. I think I just needed someone to talk to. Caleb studied him gently. Then I'm here. Evan breathed out slowly, a controlled exhale that sounded more like relief than anything else. There's something else, he confessed. Something I haven't told anyone. Caleb's posture remained open. Patient. No pressure. I think Miles is hiding something, Evan said. He's changed his passwords. He keeps taking calls in the hallway. He leaves the room when his phone buzzes. He paused. It's like he's present, but unreachable. Caleb absorbed the words with quiet empathy. That must feel awful. It does, Evan admitted. Because part of me wants to believe he's just stressed. And another part is afraid the truth is worse. And what do you feel right now? Caleb asked gently. I feel like everything is slipping, and I don't know how to stop it. Caleb nodded once, thoughtfully. You don't have to stop it alone. The sentence was neither romantic nor dramatic, it was human, sincere, and exactly what Evan didn't realize he needed to hear. His throat tightened. He looked away, blinking against an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to articulate. Caleb, Evan started, but the words didn't form. Caleb stood slowly. If you need anything, anything at all, I'm here. It doesn't have to be tonight. You don't have to explain everything. Just, don't carry it alone. Evan rose as well, and for a moment they stood facing each other, a few careful feet apart. Caleb's expression held a quiet strength, protective without crossing lines, empathetic without intruding. Thank you, Evan said. Really? Caleb nodded. You're not alone, Evan. Even if it feels like it. The sincerity of the statement lingered long after Caleb headed toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, turning back with a question in his eyes, checking, once more, if Evan needed him to stay. Evan offered a small, steady nod. I'm okay. Caleb returned the nod, respectful, believing him, and stepped out. When the door closed, Evan felt the weight of the week settle around him, but now it was different. Not lighter, but less isolating. Someone knew. Someone understood, and though he didn't fully grasp it yet, inviting Caleb upstairs had shifted something fundamental, something that would soon uncover truths he wasn't prepared for, truths he could no longer ignore. Evan didn't sleep that night. He lay awake on his side of the bed, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling while Miles slept in the guest room again, his new habit, explained away by late-night work calls and not wanting to disturb. The distance between them had become architectural, another wall in an apartment full of unspoken truths. By morning, Evan felt hollow, but clarity often arrived in the quiet hours. He showered, dressed, and walked into the kitchen with a single intention: he couldn't keep living inside a story he didn't understand. And if he wanted answers, real ones, he had to confront the silence he'd been tiptoeing around. Miles arrived late, as expected, wearing the same suit he'd left in the night before. He tossed his keys onto the counter with a practiced casualness that rang false. "You're up early," Miles said, opening the fridge, pretending nothing was wrong. "Couldn't sleep," Evan replied. Miles didn't ask why. He simply pulled out a bottle of water and leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. The conversation could have ended there, might have, on another day, but Evan stepped closer, grounding himself internally before speaking. "Miles, we need to talk." Miles's thumb stilled over the screen. He didn't look up at first, as if bracing himself before lifting his gaze. "About what?" "The distance," Evan said. "The calls at night. The passwords. Everything." A flicker crossed Miles's expression, too quick to decipher, but he set his phone aside. "Evan," he said, tone measured, "I've been dealing with a lot. Work has been—" "Don't do that," Evan interrupted gently but firmly. "Don't turn this into scheduling issues. I'm asking you plainly, is there someone else?" Silence fell with precision, cold and exact. Miles inhaled sharply, exhaled slower. "Evan, it's not physical," he said finally. "But yes. I've been talking to someone." The word settled like dust, soft, inevitable, suffocating. Evan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the truth sink into the space it always belonged. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know what it meant," Miles replied, shoulders lowering, the facade slipping. "I didn't plan it. I was lonely, too. And then things just drifted." Evan opened his eyes. "I was right here." "I know," Miles whispered. "But sometimes being near someone doesn't mean you know how to reach them." The explanation wasn't cruel, but it wasn't comforting either. It was honest, and honesty hurt more than silence ever had. Evan nodded slowly, letting himself feel the sting without hiding it. "So what now?" Miles looked down at his hands. "I don't want to hurt you. But I also don't want to pretend we're okay when we're not. Maybe we should take some time apart." The finality in his voice wasn't sharp, it was tired. Resigned. And maybe Evan had known this moment was coming long before it arrived. "All right," Evan said softly. "Maybe that's for the best." Miles stepped forward as if wanting to offer a gesture, comfort, apology, something, but stopped before closing the space between them. They both felt the boundary, the one neither of them could cross anymore. "I'll stay with a friend for a few days," Miles said. "We can figure out the rest when things settle." Evan nodded again. He didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He simply breathed, letting the truth reshape the air around him. When Miles finished packing and the front door closed behind him, the apartment didn't feel empty, it felt honest for the first time in months. The quiet wasn't oppressive, it was clarifying. Evan stood in the living room, hands braced on the back of a chair, trying to gather himself when his phone buzzed. "A message from Caleb. I'm downstairs when you're ready." Evan wasn't expecting him so early, but the timing felt almost deliberate, like someone had placed a hand on the moment to steady it. He grabbed his coat and made his way to the elevator, mind still echoing with the conversation he'd just survived. When he stepped into the lobby, Caleb was waiting by the car, posture straight but eyes softer than usual. He opened the door for Evan but didn't speak until they were both inside. "You look like you've had a long morning," Caleb said, voice low. Evan let out a breath that trembled slightly. "You could say that." Caleb didn't push. He waited, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, gaze forward. His patience felt like shelter. Miles admitted it, Evan said quietly. "He's been talking to someone else." Caleb turned his head just enough to look at him, no judgment in his expression, only concern. "I'm sorry, Evan." It's strange, Evan said, rubbing his temple. I should be angry, but mostly. I'm tired. Tired doesn't make you weak, Caleb replied. It means you've been carrying more than you should. Evan exhaled shakily, the word striking deeper than he expected. He's leaving for a few days. We're taking space. That's a big shift, Caleb said softly. But maybe a necessary one. The car remained idle, neither of them rushing to move. Evan studied the quiet strength in Caleb's posture, the same steadiness he had leaned on without realizing it. You've been a constant in all this, Evan admitted. More than I ever expected. Caleb's voice softened. You don't have to say that. I want to, Evan said. You've been something I can hold on to when everything else feels unstable. Caleb looked away briefly, grounding himself before speaking. I care about you, Evan. I have for a while. But I've also tried to respect your relationship. I know, Evan whispered. That's why I trust you. The air shifted, gentle, sincere, not romantic by force but by possibility. A space opened between them, not filled with words but with clarity. Caleb finally spoke, his tone steady. Whatever happens next, I don't want you to feel rushed. You're dealing with a loss, even if it was broken. Take your time. Evan nodded. I'm not ready for anything new. Then he added quietly, but I don't want to go through this alone. You won't, Caleb said. Not as long as you want me around. The promise wasn't dramatic, it was grounding. Reliable. Like everything Caleb offered without asking for anything in return. That he started the engine, pulling slowly out of the garage, letting Evan settle into the silence at his own pace. The city passed by in muted colors, but for the first time in a long while, Evan didn't feel lost. That he felt steady, not because his life was intact, but because someone gentle and patient was helping him rediscover his footing. And though he didn't know where this new path would lead, he sensed one truth with unmistakable clarity. Calling Caleb upstairs had been the first honest step toward rebuilding the parts of himself he'd forgotten. The story wasn't ending. That it was finally beginning.